Do you want to learn how you can create an API that gets and adds data to a large data storage center? In this video, that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do. Hi guys, my name's Sam with Complete Coding, and in this video we're going to be learning how to create an API that can get data from Amazon S3 and also put new data into Amazon S3. Amazon S3 is great for storing large amounts of data, and in this video we're going to be utilizing that. In the code now, we need to create the endpoints to create a new file and to get a new file. We're going to start with our create endpoint. So in endpoints, we create a new file called createfile.js. Inside here, we're going to be creating a file in a similar way how we created a player score in this file. So what we're going to do is actually copy the create player score code and paste it into our createfile.js. So there are some differences, so we're going to make those changes now. Instead of declaring Dynamo, we're going to declare S3 and import it from common/S3. Because S3 uses buckets and not tables, we're going to change this to be bucket and process.env.bucket name. So this now means we're going to get the bucket from the environment variables. Inside the path, what we're going to have is we're not going to be passing up an ID anymore. We're going to be passing up a file name. So we need to copy this and make sure that we've added some changes into the wording around here. So failed without a file name, missing the file name from the path, and then let file name equal event.pathParameters.filename. This file can be any sort of JSON object. So instead of declaring a user, we're going to declare some data, which is json.parse event.body. We also need to delete this line, as we don't need to add anything onto this data before writing. As we're using data and not a user, we can change this to be new data. And instead of using Dynamo, we are using S3. So S3 write. This is going to be slightly different to a Dynamo write because we need three things to be passed up. First thing we need is the data, then a file name, and finally a bucket. If this is all passed up and it's a success, that's great. But if there's an error, we need to console log out there was an error in S3 write and return null. Next, we need to check if this is a valid response. So if there is not new data, return a response of failed to write the data by file name, and the response, if it succeeds, shouldn't be new user but new data. If we save that, this is this file complete. Now what we need to do is move into our common folder and create another file called s3.js. Inside this file is where we're going to be having our handler so that we can write to S3 in a similar way as how we wrote to Dynamo in this file. So what we need to do is go into S3 and import AWS from the SDK. So const AWS equals require AWS SDK. Now we need to declare a S3 client, so const S3 client equals a new aws.s3. So that now means that we can interact with Amazon S3 using this S3 client. Now we're going to create our S3 object. So const S3 equals an object which has an async get as well as an async write function. We're going to be starting with the write function. So as we saw earlier, it takes 3 parameters. It takes some data, it takes a file name, and it takes a bucket. So the first thing we need to do in here is define the parameters. So const params is an object, and inside this object we have a bucket with a value of bucket. We also have a body, which is the body of the object and the file that we're passing up. But because it is a JSON object that we're receiving here, we need to stringify it. We do that with json.stringify, passing in the data. The last thing we need to do is pass up a key, which is the file name. With this all created, what we can now do is we can interact with our S3 client. So const new data equals await S3 client, and this time instead of writing we're going to be putting an object. So put object and pass up the parameters that we've just created, and as always we need to turn this into a promise. Now we need to check that the data is successfully created. So if there is not new data, we need to throw an error stating that there was an error writing the file. The last thing we need to do is if this has not thrown an error, we need to return the new data. Just like that. If we save this file, we now have our write created. So the last thing we need to do is export S3 from here. Module.exports equals S3 and save this file. Now that we have the endpoint and the s3.js file created, we need to make some changes to our serverless YAML file. So the first thing we need to do is look in our IAM role statements. This is what defines what permissions our lambdas have. At the moment, we're able to do anything we want with DynamoDB, but that doesn't help us much with S3. So we need to add this as a new permission. S3:* gives us permissions to read and write from Dynamo. The next thing is, in our environment variables, we currently have table name. But inside our createFile.js, we expect to have a bucket name as well. So what we're going to do is add bucket name as a new parameter and set it to be $.self: custom.bucket name. Now you might be wondering why I'm doing this, since I haven't actually got a custom bucket name field. Well, we're going to be changing a couple of things in this file, and this will work for us in this situation. So if we scroll down to custom, we can now create a new field called bucket name. And this is where we're going to define our bucket name as we did with the table name here. What we're going to do is copy and paste the bucket name to here. And now this should be the single source of truth for where the bucket is called. So now we can copy this self.custom.bucket name and replace anywhere else where we are referencing the name of the bucket, such as the S3 sync. And if we scroll down, also the properties for the bucket itself. Both of these should be set to self::custom.bucketName. If we save this file, we now have all of the buckets referencing a single point. So the last thing to do is add a new function. Here we've got the get player score and create player score. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this create player score, as we're going to be using very similar parameters. If we paste that in, we need to change a few things. First of all, it's not a create player score anymore. Create file. In lambdas, endpoints create file.handler. Change the path to be create file. And in the path parameters inside our create file event, we have event.pathParameters.filename. This is different to in the create player score where it was ID. So as it is file name, we need to change that there. We still need to make sure that it is a post request, but once that is all set up, we have everything to deploy our create file API. So to do that, we run SLS deploy, and as you can guess by now, this takes a little bit of time. So I'll get back to you when it's done. So now that has finished creating, we can see that we have a new create file function and a new post endpoint. We're going to copy this and then head across into Postman, as this is a post request. So we can paste our URL in here and change it to a post request. We then need to pass up a file name. In this case, I'm going to pass up car.json and pass up a body. This needs to be a raw body in the form of JSON. And I'm going to pass up some details about this car. So let's say the model is a Ford Focus. The year, let's say it's a 2018. And let's say the color is red. So that is some data that we're going to be passing up to our create file car.json. So if we hit send in here, we can now see that we have a set of new data created, and this was a successful request. Now that we have created some new data and added a file to our S3 bucket, we want to be able to get that data as well. To do that, we're going to create a new endpoint called getFile.js. And inside here, we're going to be copying our create file and pasting the code in here, and then changing a couple of things. We're still going to have a path parameter of file name, and we're still going to get that file name from the path parameters. This time we don't need to get any data, as this is a get function, not a write, and we're going to return the file. This time, instead of awaiting an S3 write, we're going to be calling an S3 get, and this time we only need to pass up a file name and a bucket, as that is all we need to get the file. This time in here, we're going to change it from an error in S3 write to an error in S3 get. If there is not a file, we're going to say we failed to read the data by file name, and we're going to return the file at the end. So that is this file completed, but in here we used s3.get. And if we go into our S3 file, the get isn't yet completed. So that is the next step for us. we need to accept some parameters. The first parameter was file name, and the second name was bucket. Inside here, we need to create some parameters to get the correct file. So const params is an object with a bucket and a file name. A key of file name. Once we've created the parameters, we need to get the data from S3. So let data equal await S3 client dot get object, passing in our parameters, and of course adding dot promise onto the end so that we aren't dealing with callbacks. Now that we've got the data, we need to check that it is valid. So if there is not data, throw an error stating there was a failed to get the file. So failed to get file name from bucket. If the data was valid, then we can add some logic in here so that we get the JSON format. When we get a request from an S3 object, it comes back as a blob and a buffer. This is good because it means we can store different types of data, but in our case we know that it's JSON. So we want to turn it into a string and return that. So here is a nice line of code which checks if a file is JSON. So if the file name, and we're going to slice it and say that if the end of the file name is JSON, we're going to do some processing to it. So in here, we're going to reset data to be equal to data dot body dot to string. And this is going to convert it from that buffer into a string which we can then read. Now that we've got the new data format, we just need to return the data and save this file. So that is our get file and our S3 get completed. So again, we need to move into our serverless.yaml file and add some more functions to deploy. So we're going to start by copying our create file, pasting that there, and editing this second version so that it is now a get file, not a create file. So in here, I have get file, which is going to point at lambdas.endpoints.getFile.handler. The event is a HTTP event, and we're going to change it to getFile/file name because we're still using the file name as a path parameter. And the method this time is going to be a get. As we've set up the environment variables and permissions, this should all work fine. So make sure everything is saved, go down into our terminal and run SLS deploy and hit enter. This always takes a while, so now is a perfect time to hit that like button, which helps more developers like yourselves get to see this video. So now that this has finished, we can scroll up and we see that we also have this GET request. So we're going to copy that URL and head over into Postman. We're going to check that this request still works. And as we can see, that has been successful. So if we go into our GET request and paste in our URL, we need to make sure that we're sending up the same exact file name, so car.json, and hitting our URL. If we hit send now, we get back the file, which is a stringified version of what we sent up just a second ago. So that is how you can add an API which can create and get data from Amazon S3.
To review this video, what we've learned is we've learned how to create an API that gets data from Amazon S3. We've been able to look up in a range of different files, bring back the data, do a little bit of work on the data before returning it to the customer. We've also been able to add new data to our S3 buckets. So if someone uploads a new set of data, we can put it into S3 storage for long-term and affordable storage. If you've liked this video and found it useful, please make sure to give it a thumbs up because it helps YouTube make sure that more developers just like you get to see this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button down here and the bell notification so that you find out when I next upload a video. So thank you, and I'll see you again next time.